Welcome to the Curiosity Crisis. We challenge ourselves to explore the world of business, tech, investing, and science. Get curious and be part of our journey as we discuss, challenge, and learn. Janet Wiles is a professor of human-centered computing at the University of Queensland in Australia and leads a UQ project on human-centered AI. She has delivered talks for Google and TEDx and has 30 years experience in research and teaching in machine learning, artificial intelligence, bio-inspired computation, complex systems, visualization, language technologies, and social robotics. Professor Wiles, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Unfortunately, my co-host Kush is overseas at the moment, so this will just be us. But I'm very excited for this conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I'd just like to start with the question that we ask everyone, which is, what's been keeping you curious?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, lots of things, but one particular project I got roped into in the last 12 months really has blown me away. I don't know how much you know about fungi, but it turns out that underground there are these vast networks that can be the size of a forest. They can live for tens of thousands of years, and they have electrical properties, and they send spikes a bit like the brain. So I've done some work modeling neurons in the brain. I've done work with electrophysiologists, actually recording and analyzing real signals. And suddenly this whole world has opened up that I knew absolutely nothing about.
Wow. And so this fungi can communicate with each other via electrical signals.
So they communicate. Not a lot is known.
Right.
It was an artist who got me involved. We're putting electrical sensors into a biome, so it's a tiny rainforest basically in a terrarium, about 1 meter by 1 meter, down in the basement of our electrical engineering building. And we're trying to learn how to create the electrical signals that initially, electrical sensors to record from the mycelial network, and then to actually probe it and put signals back in so we might be able to interact with it.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, so it turns out that, quick timeout on AI, but it turns out that fungi is incredibly important for the survival of plants in particularly arid climates.
Okay.
Climates with boom and bust. So Australia is actually a prime example of where you'd expect to find incredible symbiotic fungi.
Right. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive. Like, when I think of fungi, I don't think of arid climates.
People don't think about fungi. It's a third kingdom. So you've got animals, you've got plants, and then you've got fungi. They're not animals, they're not plants. They have properties of both, but they're different. And so much in ecology depends on them being able to degrade plant matter, but also support plants as they live. So you've got fungi that, you can get the ones in the movies that will kill us all off.
Yeah.
You've got the ones underground that are keeping us all alive.
Wow. I think we might have to get you back on to talk about fungi if you get some interesting discoveries on that. That's actually really cool. So you are a professor of human-centered artificial intelligence, and I was wondering if you could give a basic description of what that is and how that differs from traditional AI approaches.
Okay, where does one begin? AI. Okay, AI stands for artificial intelligence, and the question is, what is intelligence and what's artificial? And then, so there have been at least 4 different waves of AI over the last 50, 60 years. Most recently, people, when they use the word AI, often they mean sophisticated technology, perhaps that can run autonomously. They think about large language models, ChatGPT, etc. They think about the ability to speak to your phone, which is transcription. All of that is underpinned by AI. And then you've got automatic translation, you've got Google Maps. AI underpins all of these things. So human-centered AI is looking not just at the algorithms and the technology, but actually how it interacts with and impacts on humans, on people. So when you put technology into a home, you actually change the dynamics of how that home works. You either interfere with or support the natural relationships.
Yeah.
When you put it into into an urban area, so you might run your traffic lights. So traffic lights, if they're run well, can work really effectively. If they're run badly,
Yeah.
stuff things up really, really well. So automation accelerates everything. AI can accelerate everything. It can do it in a good way, or it can do it in a bad way. It can accelerate biases. It can entrench ways of thinking that empower one group to the disadvantage of others.
Yeah.
Human-centered is trying to place humans and human relationships and human people at the center of it, and asking, how does the technology support and enhance individual people's goals, but also your group's goals? If you have a football team, it's not just you, it's also who you play with, how your team works, how the juniors coming through are trained. The same thing with, if AI comes in and connects everybody, it could either disconnect everybody, or it can distract them from playing football, so everybody's off doing something online instead of actually turning up to watch a match. So you can see where technology can either enhance or detract from community, individual goals, individual lives. It changes power balances. We've seen that with all the platforms.
Yeah.
It totally changes power balances. So human-centered AI is trying to place the humans at the center, and we don't yet have really good theories and practices for how to integrate this kind of technology, and particularly automated technology, into our lives.
Yeah.
That's where HCAI comes in.
That's a very good description. I really like that idea of kind of removing the model and the algorithm and looking at how it actually impacts us, because fundamentally you're only making this technology for hopefully the benefit of humans. So yeah, I really like that. So I was wondering then about how this kind of applies to the technological landscape at the moment. So HCAI, it is essential. So do you have some examples of what it will drastically affect, like currently in the technological landscape?
So at the moment, it's very much a methodology rather than an outcome.
Okay.
So as you build a company, are you looking at who's impacted by the technology you build, how it's impacted, not just them, but the groups they belong to, and the effect on society at large. And there's not just one society, there's many different societies within any one society. So are you interested in that? Are you looking at that? So how do you design your technology so that the levers for people to control their own destiny are built in, or, as we see in many of these technologies, so that the levers are removed so that people don't have control over these technologies? So one of the areas where I think it's really interesting to look at is where a lot of companies are trying to put technology into your home.
Yeah.
Trying to automate everything, and they're trying to record everything. And they keep saying, well, it's for your benefit. Is it? Kind of like, who's getting the data? Do you have control of that data? Where is the data stored? Can it be hacked? If data is online, it can be hacked.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different issues around data, how it's collected, who's collecting it, who has the power of it. How you store data also impacts on how someone can control it. So at the moment, there's no legislation that says if I talk to someone who's been recording something in my home, say I have a robot vacuum cleaner. If that's been recording something in my home and I want to remove those recordings, a lot of the companies will just say, no, it's not possible.
Yeah.
And that's because they haven't been required in the way they recorded data to also be able to identify and remove it as easily as they record it.
It definitely feels like when a company requests your data for something, there's no transparency on what it will be used for. It's often just under the umbrella of improvement. So that is really interesting. Yeah.
So if you want to make a difference in that space, it's not enough for the company to be ethical.
Yeah.
You actually need the legislator, you need the government, you need the laws, you need your lawyers to actually be able to enforce some of these aspects. So the GDPR in Europe made a massive difference to whether you can, say you don't want the system to record everything.
Yeah.
It's a combination of all of it. So it's not just that you have the technology that enables it or that a company intends to be ethical. If the company intends to be ethical, but all its competitors don't have that constraint, they might go bankrupt.
Yes.
Or you get to realize where the ethical components are.
Yeah.
So it's all of these different components together that are critical.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think everyone intends to be ethical, but whether we can deliver on that is another question. So you've worked on a project called Florence, and I was wondering if you could give a bit of a synopsis on what that project is and what its main objectives are.
Yeah, so the Florence Project is designing technology to support people living with dementia at home. So I don't know if you realise, but the vast majority of people who live with dementia in Australia and around the world live at home, and they live at home for most of the time while they're living with dementia. So there are a number of things you need when you're living at home. One is to set up the environment, and occupational therapists are amazing. If you have someone who's living with dementia in your home and you bring an OT in, they can just help you set up the environment. But it's not just the physical environment, it's also the communication. Gradually, if people are losing the ability to bring to mind words when they need them, to be able to recognize family members now, to remember what happened or who's at the door, to be able to use the technology that they used before. There are lots of these components, and one of the really big ones is communication. So the Florence Project started as a project with the Centre of Excellence. The Australian Research Council has these centres of excellence, and there was one on language, dynamics of language. And it started thinking about how people could, started by a speech pathologist, how the system could prompt someone for words when they'd forgotten them. You just need a word, it's on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah.
Could you get an AI system that would give you the word in the moment? It sounds like a great idea. For people who are living with dementia, tip of the tongue phenomena happens initially about twice as often and then more often. So it sounds great. And we spent a couple of years, this is 10 years ago, we spent a couple of years trying to design this system, and we did a lot of great research, we published a lot of papers, we did a lot. You need transcription, you need to recognize the context, you need to recognize words and how they're used. And then a couple of years in, we brought on board an occupational therapist and a designer. And the first thing they did is get a group of 20 people who live with dementia at home or their care partners and said, what do you think of it? And they hated it.
Okay, interesting.
That's kind of like, okay, there are times in research where you think you've got this great idea, it's going to be really fabulous, you think it's fabulous, but it's not. And you've got to turn around and say, okay, take breath, what are we going to do? So Jackie and Pete, OT and designer, started asking people, well, what do you want? And what we were doing was we were saying, people living with dementia have a deficit in communication. Can we use technology to bridge the deficit? Can we bring them back to normal? And this is a way that often people use technology for people living with disadvantage of any kind. And they say, well, we want you to be normal.
Yeah.
That's a dreadful idea. It's kind of like they're living their lives perfectly effectively. They are normal in their world. Instead of thinking about how to make them normal in your world, think about what are their daily goals. And so Jackie did a huge study talking to people about what their goals were, and out of that came, make my day go better.
Okay.
That doesn't mean, solve a memory problem for me. That means, whatever it is that is in my day. So make my day go better became the Florence motto. And in one of the sessions, one of the suggestions was, there's a lot of information that you deal with in your life. Can we build a communication system that stores that information in a way that is ethical, safe, transparent, and can be tutored by people living with dementia or their care partners themselves? And so then we started doing projects around what kind of information would you like to store. So it came up with a diary, pictures of who's been visiting, who's going to visit. But instead of trying to put this all on a phone, smartphone, or a laptop, they said they wanted it in hardware.
Okay.
Could we go back to old-fashioned hardware? So what we've got are things like a music machine, which looks like an old-fashioned music machine built by one of our local companies, but inside it's actually got a smartphone with Spotify on it.
Right, okay.
So the family can program Spotify, or the carers can program it with the favorite music, update it when you like, update different seasons. We're coming into Christmas. If they like Christmas carols, you might put that on. But for them, it's very, very simple. You turn a knob, you get the music, you turn the knob off.
Yeah.
One. So there's a diary system. There's a way of recording memos through a little old-fashioned microphone. And then there's a photo sharing album which just looks like it's a tablet, but it's in a little frame.
Yeah.
And the family can send photos. So underneath this, Florence, is this integrated system for managing the life library, all the information a person wants others to know about themselves under their own control. As dementia progresses, they might need more help, or things might get simpler, so the diary might get simpler and simpler in terms of what it shows, but it is able to be managed with them in ways that are valuable to their life, whatever that is.
Just a quick intermission. Thanks so much for listening. If we could just ask a quick favor, if you could send this to a friend and recommend it, we would greatly appreciate it. It's easy to do and it helps the show out. Thanks. That's actually fascinating, especially from that initial project that you worked on, that they didn't like it. So I have family members with severe dementia, and I find it interesting thinking about that, where, yeah, you have a technology prompting their memory, but it's coming from an outside source, where like the memory problem, if you can fix that internally with medicine, for example, it might be much more useful to them. Whereas it's more of a disruption almost if it's coming from a technology. And so I find that fascinating, the way that you had to restructure the problem to be, well, actually, what are we trying to achieve here? It's to fix or to help them throughout their day. And that doesn't necessarily mean prompting their memory. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really cool project. So I guess in what ways can AI systems be designed to better understand and adapt to human communication styles? So in that scenario, you were talking about how they wanted things that not that helped their memory, but would help their day. Are there other scenarios where, whether they're conceptual or specific, that will help certain people groups? So maybe like for young children, for example, is there ways that we can better design technological systems to assist them in the way that they communicate?
So I think a big part of working with young children is getting the hardware that's appropriate to them and appropriate to their cognitive levels and development. So, for example, recently, if you've been listening to some of the news items, they've been talking about these very, very short 20-second video clips that you might get on social media, and then it flicks to something else, and then it flicks to something else, and flicks to something else. And for an adult, it's entertaining. But for a child, what it does is chop the world into episodes that have no consequences and no alternatives and no discussion. Whereas if you do something like read a book with a child, you can have alternative scenarios. It's a relationship between the person reading and the child. So the way in which you build hardware into these, whether you just let a child play with anything on your smartphone, or whether you actually have hardware that's suited to the child. So you might have a book and they push a button and it makes sounds for them. That's much more child friendly than having a book that's read on a smartphone or tablet. So integrating the hardware with the intelligence, I think, is a really important part of the future of really effective AI.
I really like that. I've always thought that the scenario of short form content is definitely not conducive to helping someone's attention span. So I think that's a really fantastic and relevant example too. So given the rapid advancements in AI over the last few years, and how effectively some of this kind of use of this technology has happened, how do you think the developments have prioritized human-centered approaches? Do you think that that's been a focus, and do you think there's room for improvement there?
Definitely room for improvement, and I don't think it's been a focus. A lot of the platform technologies were designed to circumvent human-centered AI, really.
Right.
So there's a course that's taught out of Stanford University, which was taught in the past, to show people how to actually capture someone's attention.
Yeah.
So, if you read the book Stolen Focus, you're looking at how technology aims to grab your attention and keep it as long as it possibly can. And partly that's driven by the advertisements that fund it. If you look at something like, I don't know if you play Wordle.
I do.
So Wordle was created specifically so that you play it once and then you can't play it again for 24 hours.
Yeah.
When it was first created, there were no distractions, no ads. You had, one click, it was up, it was there, and then it was gone. And so Wordle is the antithesis of something that's driven by advertising when it first started. And one of its benefits was that it would specifically limit the time you played. So when you look at the majority of the technology at the moment, they're not trying to limit your attention. The infinite scroll, you never get to the end of an infinite scroll. Whereas if you have something that's giving you maybe a 3-minute summary and then it's done, if your system turned itself off at that point and had a 5-minute timeout, your brain would then have a chance to do something else. But how many of those systems build that sort of capability in? You can program it yourself, but it takes so many clicks to do it.
Yeah.
You don't do it. So you want these systems to actually be designed around the benefit to you and your health rather than the benefit to them and their advertising revenue.
Yeah, that actually prompts the idea of Be Real as well, which is a social media that, again, was the antithesis of kind of social media the way that we have it, in that you could only post one thing per day within a period of time. And it's funny, though, that because of the way that incentives work, it wasn't profitable. And so there's been all these changes to it. There's basically... it's undone the initial intent of the product. That's really interesting. So in one of your talks about AI systems, you talked about flexible memory structures and how they contribute to the effectiveness of these systems. And my understanding was that's around the adaptability to context. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how that works and how it relates to HCAI.
Yeah, so that project was done where we were studying ways in which robots could learn language. So you'd have a concept and you'd have a term to name that concept, and the robot would learn the term. In fact, this particular project, the robots were creating their own language. So you had two robots interacting in the environment. When they came to a given location, they would name it.
Yeah.
So you think about, if you think about mathematical structures, this is basically a matrix. You've got one side is an input, the other is the output, and you've got you could call it a queue and a target, or an object and a name.
Yeah.
But it turns out that we use many of the same objects in different contexts. We might call them by different names.
Yeah.
If you're talking to your grandmother or you're talking to your a young child, you might use different words than you would use talking to, say, teenage friends.
Yeah.
So if you know the context, and the context could be who you're talking to, where you are, what time of year it is, what else is going on, you can actually have these word namings to be context sensitive.
Yeah.
So the flexible memory structures that we were using in the robot language learning project are, you can think of them as a 3-dimensional matrix or a tensor.
Yeah.
Where the third dimension is the context.
Yeah.
And that enables you to have lots of different Q-target associations.
Yes. Yeah, because it's relational, right? So then the extra dimension gives you that ability to have the input, output, and the relation.
Yeah.
Right.
So the interesting thing about using tensor structures is that mathematically they capture all of the information for a single instance. They only generalize in a linear way.
Mm-hmm.
So linear means if you combine two inputs, the output you get is a linear combination of those, whereas the modern large language models are all nonlinear.
Yes.
That you have very large data sets, you're training over all of the data sets and all of the contexts, but you only have one algorithm when you're finished, which is the entire neural network.
Yeah.
So in a lot of those systems, they're not able to capture context apart from what is represented in the data itself.
Yeah, because I think they use Euclidean distance and other things to look at their data points and work out a relation. But they can be unrelated, but be sitting in the data within a close distance.
Yeah, the important thing about those models is that all your information must be in the data. Whereas if you have a robot that's actually getting experience in the world, it's physically there with you, you can have a shared context with the robot that is actually not captured in the large language model data, but rather in the robot's physical embodiment.
Right. And in its reality then. So it can derive new information then as well.
Yes.
Right. That's really interesting. Okay.
So that's a direction that I actually think robots are going to radically enhance or change. the way in which large language models can be used
Mm-hmm.
and the way in which they create meaning. Because at the moment, the meaning comes from the data that was created, not from a task. Large language models don't have a task that they're trying to achieve. Robots can have tasks that they're trying to achieve in the world.
Yeah, that's I think as well with large language models, the amount of data to get meaningful improvement is really drying up. So I think there's a likely chance that the way that they tackle this problem is going to change, and yeah, that could be definitely the way that they do it. So I guess one of my my closing questions is around HCI as a field, and what are you excited about most, especially in the future of HCI? Like, where do you think it's going, and is there anything that really stands out to you as a meaningful change that will happen in the future?
So I am really excited. In fact, next year I'm going to start teaching a second year course in human-centered AI at the University of Queensland.
Okay, awesome.
And so I get to design the course for the next 6 months.
That'll be a lot of fun.
So the university has given me 3 months to actually go and visit various places, particularly in Europe and America,
Yep.
and also in Australia, to talk to people about ways in which they're teaching it.
Yeah.
I think we need to rethink how we teach in an era of AI. The whole of the university has been turned upside down with large language models. Some students use LLMs to boost their learning, make themselves much faster and much more adept at doing things. But there are other students who use it to remove themselves from the learning completely and try not to learn anything at all.
Yeah.
So we've got 10% of students at the university, according to a recent survey, who put their assignment into a large language model, get the result, and submit that without even reading it.
Wow. Yeah.
And that is just, when you read these things, the assignments that come back like that, they're very wordy.
Right.
They make all sorts of subtle mistakes. They don't appreciate and understand the task because they don't have the context of the course that you're teaching. So I think there are ways in which they really can augment. If you need to learn something super fast, you can use it to get you into the terminology, to create structure in common ways of learning. But as you push to the edge of your knowledge and the edge of the knowledge of society, there's less and less in the large language model that can help you. So you can use it to structure your learning, but then the learning is yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that human-centered AI is trying to go outside the large language model approach to actually working with community members, individuals, whatever group you would like your new technology or your system, or reworking existing systems to work better, and trying to bring in technology that augments and assists people in what they're doing, their everyday tasks, rather than trying to replace them.
I really sympathize with that. So as a software engineer, I use LLMs all the time, but it's mainly because you can massively lower the barrier of entry to learn something new. And I find it really useful. But yeah, I definitely can see, it's hard to do new research when, the data that you're trying to find is not within the set that you're prompting. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be very useful, I think, for the future of our learners, for sure.
So one interesting area of the recent ones is called RAG AI, RAG.
Yeah.
Retrieval Augmented Generation AI. And RAG AI is interesting because instead of just in the large language model, whatever it's been trained on, you can give it your own proprietary data.
Yeah.
And it will use that and access that material.
Yeah.
So I think that is going to be really useful. That's useful for companies. It's useful for researchers. So being able to keep your data out of the public data sets, but be able to then use the ability of large language models to interact through language.
Yeah.
So you as a software engineer have specific skills of being able to speak programming languages or write programming languages.
Yeah.
People can program these systems through words, through these large language models. We're going to have a revolution that's as big as, I think, the personal computer.
Interesting. That's a big call. Yeah, I think it'll definitely lower the barrier of entry of being able to produce code and programs, which is really fascinating. But we'll see, because I think there's definitely a lot of challenges along the way, and especially in terms of the amount of data on each language and solutions within those languages. So as you get more esoteric programming languages, you have less and less information and data on that. And we notice it at work with engineering things. If we have something that's a little bit more niche, it's much harder to get information on. So yeah, that's awesome though. So I have one more closing question, which is, if you have a listener who's come along on this discussion, and there was just one thing that they could take away from this regarding the field of HCAI, what would you have them remember from this conversation?
I would say that technology supports human relationships. It doesn't replace people.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for today's discussion, Janet. I really appreciate it. I know you're busy, especially working on this new course now as well. And yeah, just thanks heaps for coming on. And it's been a fantastic discussion.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Thanks for listening. Find us at thecuriositycrisis.com and Curiosity Crisis on Instagram. We're on all major streaming services, so you can listen how you like. We'd like to just ask a quick favor. If you could share this with a friend, your recommendation means a lot. Thanks, and we'll catch you in the next episode.